What began as a mistake evolved into something more serious. A failure turned into a defence, a problem became a pattern, and ultimately the situation now looks like a cover-up.
A Conservative MP just stood up in Parliament and accused the Prime Minister of misleading the House over a national security appointment. And what follows gets even worse.
And the Prime Minister told this House only a week ago, no pressure existed whatsoever. Now, if that was the only issue, that would justify being referred to the Privileges Committee to resolve what the exact truth was. But it wasn't. Because plainly there, if the Foreign Office is right, the Prime Minister is wrong, and on that timetable...
But wait until you hear why officials say Number 10 was uninterested in the security clearance itself.
But is it not true that the post of UK ambassador to Washington would be held by someone who would therefore have access to extremely sensitive intelligence, potentially including nuclear cooperation, and the fact that Mandelson had been found to have been working for a Russian company post the invasion of Ukraine should have completely barred him from that appointment?
This isn't just political drama anymore. They're openly talking about intelligence risks, Five Eyes cooperation, and national security. Before we roll the full exchange, share this video first. Seriously, most people will never see this clip unless viewers push it out themselves. Hit like, subscribe, and hype the channel if you want more uncensored political coverage like this. Now let's go back to where it started.
Sir David Dix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes the wisdom of the House is crystallised in the comments of us ordinary backbenchers, and particularly today with the brave speech of the Honourable Lady for and indeed with the intervention of the Honourable Member for Perry Barr on the Leader of the Opposition. Both of them, in effect, said that what we have lived through in these last several months is a tragedy, not just for this House, not just for the government, not just for the Labour Party, but for the trust in government, the trust in our democracy of ordinary people. Now, at the risk of expulsion from my own party, I will admit to having hoped after the election that the Prime Minister would succeed. Because it's in the interest of the country that he did, but in some ways even more importantly, it's in the interest of our democracy that he did. Because there is already extant throughout the entire Western world a corrosion of belief in democracy, on and on and on. This will make it worse. Now, we're here today for a simple reason. Statements by the Prime Minister made in this chamber are at odds with those provided by the civil service on the material issue of Peter Mandelson. This matters. It's not a stunt, it matters. Honesty between ministers and Parliament is fundamental to our democracy. Without it, scrutiny fails. Without it, accountability fails. Without it, trust fails. The responsibility for absolute honesty rests most heavily on the Prime Minister. So the standard that should be met by the Prime Minister is even higher than for others. Recklessness with the truth for any minister is unacceptable. From the Prime Minister, it's indefensible.
That word right there, indefensible. He's not just criticising a decision. He's accusing the Prime Minister of crossing a line Parliament is supposed to treat as sacred, honesty to the House.
Now, all political parties have their inherent flaws, and I'm not going to spend a whole day talking about mine. But the origins of this situation, the origins of this situation lie in a stance often taken by Labour MPs, which is that good intentions somehow justify bad decisions. We mean well, so our mistakes don't matter. Worse, we mean well, so we should be forgiven for everything, whether it's freebies or wrong appointments or whatever. That mindset, which I'm afraid is sort of sanctimonious arrogance, sustained by a habit of believing their own propaganda, is precisely what led to the appointment of a deeply unsuitable individual as our ambassador to Washington. A man twice dismissed after scandal. A man under formal investigation now by the EU's anti-fraud office. A man with an extraordinary relationship with a convicted paedophile. A man driven above all by a pursuit of glamour, money and status. A man who turned amorality into an art form. And in addition to that, a man who has plainly compromised by an over-close relationship with the proxies of both the Russian and the Chinese government. Together, these facts should have made this appointment unthinkable. Yet these concerns were brushed aside. The head of the diplomatic service, we heard this morning in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, was not even consulted. Why? Because within the London establishment, a ludicrous self-deception had taken hold. That the peculiarities of the Trump administration could be countered to the peculiarities of Peter Mandelson. Yes, of course.
Grateful to my right honourable friend. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that almost universally the previous ambassador, Dame Karen Pierce, was widely respected and felt to have a good relationship with the previous Trump administration? There was no reason to believe she wouldn't have one with the current Trump administration.
Well, that's entirely true. And in fact, the current Trump administration made that point to the government before the nomination of Peter Mandelson. So that perverse logic led to the most obviously unwise public appointment in modern times. And the implied message, unfortunately, was clear. Government appointments rest on networks of patronage. Great offices of state are perks to be handed out to friends. And it's systemic. They even tried to get an ambassadorial appointment for Lord Doyle, a man so unsuitable he's even had their whip withdrawn. Mandelson's unsuitability was evident before vetting began. It would have been surprising had the vetting service not found grounds to reject the appointment. I suspect Number 10 knew that, and they leaned on the Foreign Office to ensure the outcome was secured quickly and without question. And by the way, one of the honourable members, I can't remember his name or seat, tried to suggest that pressure for time is different from pressure on outcome. When it's vetting, it's not. I mean, my first positive vetting took 6 months. Now, I know I've got an unreliable friend. Fewer, I think, than Lord Mandelson. It would have taken quite a long time to get to the bottom of all the issues related to Lord Mandelson. So saying you've got to do it quickly is the same as you've got to do it shoddily. So let's not lose sight of it. I'll give way.
Francois.
He's making an excellent speech. But is it not true that the post of UK ambassador to Washington would be held by someone who would therefore have access to extremely sensitive intelligence, potentially including nuclear cooperation, and the fact that Mandelson had been found to have been working for a Russian company post the invasion of Ukraine should have completely barred him from that appointment on that one ground alone?
Sir David.
My honourable friend is exactly right, and indeed it's worse than that, because it is the nexus, that post is the nexus of the entire Five Eyes intelligence cooperation. And in our service, it's not like the Americans. So the American embassies, the CIA is freestanding. The ambassador doesn't matter. In our service, the ambassador runs the local Secret Service element, if you like. And so he is or she is entirely responsible, has entire access. And it's particularly an issue with the Americans, because the Americans are incredibly sensitive about the corruption or in any way undermining the security of that arrangement. So we could actually put at risk the whole Five Eyes cooperation arrangement, but the honourable friend leads me off on a completely different tangent. So when asked this morning, to come back to the general point, when asked this morning about delay and attitude and pressure, so when asked this morning at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee if he recalled any dismissiveness in Number 10 about the importance of Mandelson's vetting, Sir Philip Barton, that's Ollie Robbins' predecessor, described Number 10 as uninterested.
Now, to be fair, critics of this argument would say political appointments always involve pressure and urgency. That's true. But here's the question. When intelligence access is involved, where exactly is the line?
Uninterested in his security clearance. The evidence Sir Ollie Robbins gave was that throughout January there was constant pressure and an atmosphere of constant chasing. Yesterday, Ian Collard, the former head of the Foreign Office security team, corroborated Sir Ollie Robbins' account. And just this morning, again, Sir Philip Barton repeatedly emphasised there was pressure to secure Mandelson's vetting clearance within, I quote, a very compressed timescale. And the Prime Minister told this House only a week ago, no pressure existed whatsoever. Now, if that was the only issue, that would justify being referred to the Privilege Committee to resolve what the exact truth was. But it wasn't. Because plainly there, if the Foreign Office is right, the Prime Minister is wrong, and on that timetable, actually deliberately wrong. But let's take some other occasions. On the 4th of February of this year, the Prime Minister gave an unambiguous impression when asked about Epstein's coverage in the security clearance that he'd seen Peter Mandelson's security vetting. But in April, he told the House, on the 14th of April, you found out for the first time that Mandelson had been granted developed vetting clearance against a specific recommendation of the United Kingdom security vetting, that developed vetting clearance should be denied. These two statements are incompatible. Again, a freestanding failure of the rules. And more, this chaotic clash of opinions reinforces the impression that far from following due process, as the Prime Minister has maintained on a number of occasions, Number 10 was effectively making it up as it went along. Yeah. On the 11th of November 2024, the then Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, as we've heard already from the Leader of the Opposition, issued explicit advice: secure the necessary security clearances before confirming your choice. Again, this was reinforced this morning by Sir Philip Barton, who described the correct process as, quote, the normal order is vetting and then announcement. Normal due process was clear, but the Prime Minister did the opposite. Yep. Claims that this was normal defy common sense. For career ambassadors, the DV, the direct vetting, happens at every new post. You go to become an ambassador in Tehran, you're DV'd. You go to become an ambassador in Washington, you're DV'd again. But the DV is an update, so it's lower risk, and by definition, our ambassadors, generally speaking, are low-risk security personnel anyway. This is plainly not the case for a high-risk figure like Peter Mandelson. Indeed, frankly, it's harder to imagine a higher-risk appointment to a post, as my honourable friend, said, is of the utmost sensitivity. To appoint first and vet later is not due process, it's certainly not prudent, it's a gamble with national security and a risk for our single most important alliance. So there are three instances where the Prime Minister made questionable statements. His insistence that there was no pressure when there evidently was, the two versions he gave on when he saw the vetting file, and the assertion that due process was followed when it clearly was at odds with the process described by both the Cabinet Secretary and the Permanent Secretary for the Foreign Office. So the Prime Minister made a deeply questionable decision. Whether it was cronyism, a misunderstanding of the role, or excessive leniency towards a member of his own party, something he would never have tolerated, quite rightly, from any other party, we cannot know for certain. Whatever the explanation, the conclusion is unavoidable.
So let's simplify what he's arguing here. 1. Pressure was allegedly applied. 2. Procedures may have been bypassed. 3. Parliament may have been misled afterward. And that's the combination turning this into a potential political disaster.
The decision was wrong. And to implement it, established procedures were bent out of shape. The civil service was placed under extreme pressure to deliver outcomes that sat on the margins of propriety. When concerns were raised, they were not confronted but sidestepped. As usual in number 10, an attempt was made to place the blame on somebody else. Even in this week's New Statesman, traditionally a banner carrier for the Prime Minister, even in this week's New Statesman, I think it was Tom McCabe's article, there is a quote from a senior government official who goes on at length against the Prime Minister, but he ends by saying, ask Chris, ask Sue, ask Morgan, ask Ollie. He will say he takes responsibility, but then he makes everyone else pay. That's what we're looking at. So rather than addressing concerns directly, the Prime Minister proceeded regardless, and only later sought to justify his decision with answers that were, I'm afraid, frequently misleading. As a former DPP, he should have known better. What began as a mistake evolved into something more serious. A failure turned into a defence, a problem became a pattern, and ultimately the situation now looks like a cover-up. But today, as we've already heard from the front bench and a number of other speakers, is not about determining guilt, it's about determining whether there is a case to answer. Finding the truth and adjudicating guilt is the task of the Committee of Privileges, which is both the time and the access required to examine the evidence in full. Now, much has been made of Boris Johnson's appearance, as it were, before the Privileges Committee, and I am famously a fan of Boris Johnson. When it was brought to this House, that question, whether it should go, it was clearly recognised at the time that this was not delivering a verdict, but was deciding whether there was a case to be answered. Now, I, at the time, with our own Whip's office, made it very plain that I would not countenance any attempt to block a proper investigation on a House of Commons matter. But I was by no means alone. There are a number of other colleagues who made the same argument. And as a result, the government of the day accepted this is a House of Commons matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It is improper for the government to intervene in such a matter to try to guide the House. Accordingly, the motion passed without a whip and without division. Interestingly, the honourable gentleman thought. Mr. Speaker, you know, in a debate which is about misleading the House, I do wonder when members of this House accuse others of not voting in a measure without a vote. So I will not be taking intervention from him. I will certainly not be taking intervention from him. As the honourable gentleman is a noisemaker, not a truth issuer. On the evidence before us today, contradictions, procedural failures and an emerging pattern of conduct, there is plainly a case for referral. Where doubt exists, it should be resolved through proper scrutiny. Where a case exists, it should be tested. This case should go to the Committee of Privileges and go today.
Cole Turner.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman for Goole and Pocklington. We rarely agree politically, him and I, but we do work together, I think, constructively in the constituency for the betterment of the region. Mr. Speaker, I start by way of an apology, because I think it was mentioned by the Leader of the Opposition. I did accidentally publish correspondence.
You're never going to get this level of detail from most mainstream coverage. So here's the question. If you believed a Prime Minister misled Parliament on a national security issue, would that be resignation worthy? Put your answer in the comments because I'm pinning the best one. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video and subscribe in one click.